Hello, everyone. Welcome to our World Today, the Unionist Perspective, or our weekly live discussion on the news and what's happening around the world. I hope you're doing good. Today we have like a pretty packed program as per usual. And we are starting with a topic that is very dear to our hearts, which is like trans rights and trans care for children, something that is very sensitive and something where we always need to discuss, I would say, the ethics and the details of it would seem at the moment. And we're talking about it because all over Europe, especially in the UK, there is kind of a wave of studies and bills around trans care for children and basically trans children and teens. And I would love for Isaiah and Sage to kind of summarize the situation for us and tell us the big lines, and then maybe we can ask a little bit more questions and see what is actually going on here.
Yeah, okay. So the big overview of this topic is the following. So in the United Kingdom, as in the US and Canada and lots of other countries, there has been a large increase, like a surge in the number of kids and also adults seeking gender affirming care. So gender affirming care, in case anyone didn't know what it is, it can include puberty blockers, which simply delay puberty for children. It can include hormone therapies like testosterone or estrogen, and for the most part, that's what it entails. Um, Usually, there aren't very many surgeries that minors are allowed to have, if they want to change their bodies. But anyway, so there was a review done. We can call it the Cass review because it was commissioned by Dr. Hilary Cass, who's in the National Health Service of the UK, which is their government-run health system. Um, so this in this review that she spearheaded, it's like remember, it's a 400-page document, so there's a lot in it, but we can confidently say that what it's saying is there's like weak, insufficient evidence that gender affirming care, like hormone therapy and puberty blockers, are actually beneficial to youth. Okay. So they're saying if a kid says, hey, I think I might be transgender, I might be non binary, I don't want to go through with the puberty that my body is going to go through, they're saying that based on the studies that have been done, there's insufficient evidence. Okay.
Which isn't true.
Which, well, it's much more complicated than what they're saying because they reviewed 25 studies. They found one was had scientifically strong evidence, and the rest moderate. But before we say anything else about this, I just want to note that the ethics. So we can get into this more later, but there are certain ethical and practical challenges of conducting randomized controlled trials for this kind of thing and for a lot of pediatric care because conducting randomized trials on children is ethically very problematic, especially in this area. So, and also it's impractical. So I just want to say that before anything else is said because it's a glaring, gaping hole in the logic of this report. Anyway, so as a result of the report, the NHS, I think it's just the government funded healthcare because you can always go private in the UK, but the NHS has stopped prescribing and giving out puberty blockers to children now. And for at least a year, and then they're gonna like do some more studies about this, about the effectiveness of this. So that's basically, in short, what happened with that. So that's the overview. Yes.
But we were also talking about like if you were to look at studies that have been done in like America, there is tons of evidence to support that um, gender affirming care for youth has
Yeah.
is extremely beneficial.
Yeah, there is.
So
But there that's the thing, but there aren't randomized controlled trials, but what we
because it's unethical,
because it's unethical and
right?
impractical. So
But
because you if you get the placebo, you kind of know, right? You're like, I'm going through puberty. I wonder why. It's because you got the placebo. So that would
which
be
would be extremely
that
unethical
would
to
be
do too.
unethical and impossible.
Yeah.
So
So, one
yeah.
question, and then I want to add one comment, and then we can go into more questions. What is placebo for people who may not know what it
Yeah.
is in the area of trans affirming care?
Yeah, it's just in research, it's basically like instead of receiving the medicine, you receive a fake pill that does nothing. So they would do that, like they'd be like, hey everyone, we're giving you this medicine for this medical condition. Let's see how it does. And some people get the placebo, some don't, because the patient has to be unaware of what treatment they're getting in order to have scientifically rock solid evidence. But
Which you could see why that would be like if someone's wanting a youth is wanting gender affirming care, like that's not cool.
it's not.
If you would get a placebo, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
because you're like, oh,
no.
I'm going through puberty anyway, and you know you're getting the placebo because these medicines have a very predictable effect.
So that's what, yeah, sugar
The
pill,
sugar pill,
right?
yeah, not
And
even.
that's what a randomized control study would involve, which is
Right.
Yeah.
why it's very problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Hmm.
That's actually weird because I know placebo in the side of research is a fake pill, like a non-effective pill. But like my mom worked in a pharmacy, and maybe it's different in France. And my dad is a doctor, so it's like placebo for um approved drugs is basically like there is the original, and then there is a placebo, and it's like kind of the name that we give it, but it's still like I don't know. It's like
Hmm.
usually when it's already out on the market, it's basically like, oh, the chemical treatment that you're receiving is supposed to do the same effects as the other things. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's a cultural thing. I think it's just like a cultural thing, maybe. Because usually placebo is just like, the fake pill, and then you still have the effects because your body is just reacting to the fake pill. But yeah.
So I
Um,
think you may be referring to what would be considered generic. So it
Generic.
wouldn't be,
Yeah.
yeah, it wouldn't
Yeah.
be the overall original formulation, but it would have a formulation that does exactly the same thing, just at a much less costly price.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think people think that generic is like a placebo or it's like a fake pill or things like that. So maybe that's the confusion. Maybe we needed to clarify this because I don't know why I brought it up, but maybe people will like have had questions about this. And I want to preface my other questions with something and saying that in research, again, saying that results are inconsequential basically doesn't prove anything. So it's like it doesn't prove that it's negative or it doesn't prove that it's positive. But with the reason that you said about how unethical and um, just non-practical in general research about trans affirming care would be on children because of the nature of the research. Um, you cannot really have a research like other people would do. And we've had plenty in history of examples about how research helps for most things. And then there are certain things like ethnic groups and, gender affirming care and things like that, where it just doesn't work because it's impossible to test it the same for everybody. And so saying that is inconsequential with many missing variables in the research is basically it. It's like you don't have the results, you don't have the actual result. The problem is that now that the NHS has done that, the government and the media are jumping on this opportunity to say that it is ineffective. And that's how it was presented in the media sources that we had, which is very dangerous because I'm like, really? And my first reaction, I'm a human being. So even if I'm a researcher or not, I'm seeing this and I'm like, oh my God. And it's by the NHS. So, wow. And that's why I was like, Nila, who has done thank you for her. She's done extensive research on this topic for us tonight. I was like, can you find the actual study, the study groups and things like that, so we can compare sources? Because this feels a little bit like there is some underlying upsets there or sensitivity or things that aren't clear, basically. And, you know, again, this research says nothing. But as soon as it was there, I noticed that France also, the parliament in France, um, used this opportunity to try to start a bill going against gender affirming care for children. And it's like basically the governments in Europe are going to base their I guess their laws on that. And that's the problem with today is that even though we we don't have far right movements in the government, usually on this type of sensitive topic, people tend to be more on the right wing of the political spectrum. So it means that bills are going to be supported by the misreading and miscommunication around a study that doesn't have effective results. And I think that's a huge problem because why would you rush into doing a bill for that, saying that you want to do it in order to protect children? And that's the same thing with abortion. Why would you rush into a bill for abortion stating that it's unhealthy? There is no waiting in order to make sure that the research and study that we have is actually very sure in order to move forward. And we don't see that kind of rushing for other things like climate change, which is actually a crisis that we should take care of more effectively. And we have studies to prove that. And we don't do anything. So um, it means that, and my preface is super long, so I guess I'm just going to end on that. It just feels like we don't have our priorities in the right areas. And we talked about this for many weeks now. There is no respect for human life in the sense that we are not prioritizing the right things. And it's not to say that we're supporting gender affirming care if it's actually harmful or ineffective for children. The thing that I'm saying is that the media portrayed it, and I felt like reading this um, gender affirming care was harmful for children in the UK. And the truth of the study, the deep end of the study is, oh, actually, no, they just said it was inconsequential. So there's actually no response to that. There's no conclusion there. And I just want to point that out because there is just the gap that you were pointing is just something that people would do out of an upset or a lack of, I would say, compassion or consideration for people's situation in this space and trying to push their agenda on something that they shouldn't do, you know? So I don't know how you guys feel about that, but it's just like my conclusion reading all of this and integrating all of this.
So I just want to check with you. Does the study say that it's inconsequential or inconclusive? Yeah, okay, so it's inconclusive. So in essence, what we're finding based on the findings of the study is that no real or lasting conclusions can be drawn. And I think that's the challenge that we're sitting with, is that in the absence of important and lasting conclusions from their research or findings from their research, there is a gap in understanding. And that understanding, again, is what you were speaking to around actually not respecting the sanctity of choice, the right to choose. Yes, these may be children, but I think they probably have a sense of what they are feeling and who they are. And maybe not to say that nothing is working, but maybe delay certain things so that they have the opportunity to really be informed. But to make such a judgment based on inconclusive findings is very scary.
Yeah. Sorry, I meant inconclusive. But yeah, it's basically that. And what makes me even more sure of what we're talking about right now is that we saw the same patterns with neurodivergence and autism 10 years ago. And um, I was like a first-hand witness of this. It's like, you know, before when we didn't have enough research to have conclusive results and realize that maybe more people in society were neurodivergent than we thought, basically all of the psychological tests were inconclusive. And then people were like, from this inconclusive test, I can't say anything about you. Or the worst thing is that the worst psychologist would say, there is no problem with you, go back home. And the child or even the adult would go back home and say, like, I still don't have answers on why I feel bad or why I feel different or things like that. And that's why people are realizing today that, oh, I was maybe an undiagnosed autistic person or undiagnosed, I had undiagnosed ADHD or things like that. It's not that there is more. It's not that it's a trend. It's that the research show that a lot of people were dealing with this. And I think I can confidently say that we can see a parallel with how transition is being, handled right now globally.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right. Because it's what I think what you're pointing to is that um, in the absence of like evidence that's like based on randomized controlled trials, which is the highest standard of scientific evidence, people's people's biases can kind of come through, you know. So if someone's unwilling, like you said, if someone's unwilling to acknowledge neurodivergence or autism, then that could impact their treatment, their diagnosis, their interactions with patients. It's still to this day. I was watching this video in this article about Canada, and this trans young man in Canada was saying, yeah, he had an appointment with a doctor who's supposed to give him a referral to go to the next step in getting gender affirming care. And the doctor asked him all these questions that you should never have to answer as a teenager who's trans, such as what if you want to get pregnant in the future? Like, what if you have a husband? What if you want to keep your current anatomy, I guess, without getting too graphic? And it's just kind of, these questions are like, come from a place of ignorance, usually, or intolerance, because there's so little knowledge about this. But here's the thing, though, just because there's so little knowledge about something, or just because you haven't had a certain level of scientific study, it doesn't mean you deny the care. Like, for example, okay, so in the same article I read, this Canadian pediatrician said up to 70, I think it was 75% of medications that kids are prescribed are not, it's not established through a randomized controlled trial that is effective. It's just through practice and through using it and seeing what happens. Like, for example, prescribing a kid penicillin if they have an earache, an ear infection, right? How do you generate a randomized controlled trial about that? An ear infection comes and goes in like a few days or a week, right? How do you do a randomized controlled trial on that? What are the ethics of that? And yet, doctors are still able to prescribe kids penicillin for that. So it's the same kind of thing with gender affirming care, although it's a much more impactful decision to undergo hormone therapy, although some things about it are reversible. It's much more impactful. But to give you an example, one of the 25 studies that they reviewed in the CAS report in the UK was, it was a study of like 3,499 kids who underwent gender affirming care, hormone therapy. And it was like, out of those 3,499, 10, meaning less than 1 in 100 of those kids, ended up detransitioning to some degree in the future. 10 out of about 3,500. So, and the issue they found with studies like that is not, again, it's not that they were inconclusive. The study was very conclusive that kids who decide on this path are serious about it and enjoy the effects of it. Their critique was that it wasn't a randomized controlled trial. But again, like, you can't do that. This is a trial where, like, okay, let's see. Let's just follow and track these kids. It's a longitudinal study. So let's track these kids over the course of 10 years and see what happens, with them. So yeah, it's just, I didn't know that about pediatric medicine, but yeah, a lot of the time you can't, it's either unethical or it's impractical to do randomized controlled trials. And so, yeah, you're basing it off of like trial and error and experience and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I guess there's fears people have sometimes about, I feel like everyone needs to go through a worldview change, and it's big psychologically to go through a worldview change as a trans person. Like Jeff and Shaleia, our spiritual teachers, have said this, that it's a big psychological process to go through. I think sometimes people are afraid of their own worldview change that they need to make for themselves, whatever it may be. And so they kind of project that fear onto others who are courageous enough to face it. And yeah, it's crazy,
I think you worded it pretty well. My observation from scientists and intellectual classes, so people that work more in the intellectual fields and political fields, and that are from certain like upper classes, where basically they had a culture of very traditional studies. So basically a lot of our leaders right now, they base themselves, just like science, on um, quantitative research. Quantitative research? Do you say that in English? So quantitative research. Um, the problem is, and what we see is that the actual application of life, when what you see about like the social trends, marketing, and these trials and research and application for things where it's impossible to do randomized trials, is that it's more based on qualitative research. Mm, and qualitative, relationships and reputation and practice. And I think, oh, in a sense, we all went through this to be like in our on our spiritual path. There's just this little thing about, you know, for example, like, I don't know, Sage and me, like we studied political science, and at one point I was like, where is the practice? Where are the practical applications? Like, what can I do with this? I feel I'm supposed to be studying human behavior, but I feel so far off from actually seeing human experiences. And as a Black woman in generally like white masculine environment, I feel far from my own experience of life in this circle, in this environment. And so I feel like as you take the path, the spiritual path, you shift from a quantitative society to a qualitative society. And imagine that you come from a lineage, a family of intellectuals or political leaders or things like that, that has functioned for 500 years more in this kind of quantitative funnel. You're going to be scared about the change of like the qualitative research or like the other side of society that works on like qualitative relationships. And I think that's where the projection that you were talking about comes, because the most of the most of the criticizing that we have against us at that moment is like it's not proven, so it must be wrong. But like hundreds, thousands of people are saying that they feel happy with their life change. So qualitatively, I don't know, qualitatively, um, it works. In terms of like quantity and the way society used to work, um, it's inconclusive. They would say it's inconclusive, or they're not sure, or they want to have more proof, which means more numbers. So, yeah, but I guess instead of changing that, or having to have a big shift, it would be good, and I think we all talked about it at one point, to have a meeting of both in the middle. Like the actual good thing would be that science and spirituality work hand in hand to have even more innovation. So you don't give up either one of those. And I think in ourselves, we do research for this discussion. So in ourselves, we do have that quantitative relationship as well. We cannot forego it altogether. Um, it would be just good to have an acceptance of the relationship of both in order to have even more power, even more, you know, yeah, just power to do good for society. If the NHS was like, it's inconclusive, however, what we observed in the practical world is that this is it. And without having a quantitative conclusion, you tell people, okay, like maybe it's not time to have results. Maybe it's a time of observation and discussion instead of decision or things like that. I don't know. But yeah, it's just my feeling. Maybe a relationship. Um, it's a relationship issue between what feels like tangible and what feels more like, intangible. I don't know. There's just this feeling about it.
So I think you've touched on something very important in the relationship element. So we understand that certain things obviously require some quantitative evidence because numbers don't often lie. So, and if if you doing the right things to ensure that your sampling is correct, that it's representative, and all of those weird and wonderful things, numbers don't generally lie. But you have to understand the experience behind those numbers. And so, while a quantitative study will give you faster results, a qualitative study is probably going to give you more meaningful results under these kind of circumstances. We also have to consider, if you look at the core of it, what has been the experience of people where gender affirming care and treatment has been withheld? Now, what has been the psychological, the social, the economic impact of the decision to say no? And how has that impacted on their quality of life in and of itself? So there's many more aspects to consider in doing this kind of study, and also given that at a younger age we understand that we are probably experimental in the world and trying to find our place and trying to imprint on a world that has imprinted on us as we're growing up. And so we also have to allow for the space of those two pieces to come together and for somebody to form and engage and have their own relationship with life. And it's not always somebody's right as a parent, as a caregiver, to stop them from experiencing certain things. So there is definitely a balance. There's definitely a thing to be said for considering the consequences of a yes and a no, and understanding the impacts that that could have. I mean, if I just think about it, when I visited Switzerland, and at some point I was like, why do I not see youth or kids in the street? And it's literally this conversation that at the age of 12, they make this vocational decision that forces them into that takes them into a study program that determines the rest of their lives at the age of 12. And so the incidence of suicide amongst youth is a lot higher than in some other European countries. So there's a lot of consequences to hard and fast rules and decisions that do need to be considered. And it has to be considered from the perspective of the person living it and experiencing it. Otherwise, we are just making judgment calls.
I was thinking exactly the same about basically we need a freedom of choice. We need to be flexible with helping our kids, our young generation, choose for themselves. And we need to be in support of their explorations and choices with like maybe an adult guidance of like maybe this is not the right decision or maybe this is a good decision. But we cannot be God for them. We cannot control their choices. And I think this is yet again a huge thing that everyone has to heal at this time. So based on the freedom of choice, I would say it would be good to talk a little bit about this other thing that includes the body, and that is the body of women. And it pertains to the news of the USA Olympics uniform for this summer's Olympic Games. And basically what is happening is that there is an outrage on the internet around how skimpy the bikinis of women sports uniform are, especially in track fields, because there's a bikini, and in volleyball, where the bikini is like very, very high up, and gymnastics and things like that. And I want to nuance things a little bit because it would seem from the best sources that I have found, it would seem that for some sports, the bikini was the first look at the women's apparel. And for example, for track field, Sha'Carri Richardson, Olympic winner, huge athlete, super badass, prefers to have the bikini line on her uniform. And so basically she modeled the bikini. But the track field, it would seem, has other option, allegedly, because it was very like it used quotation marks in the best sources that I have found. But it was better than just like, oh my God, we're just like trying to patronize women. Or, well, the problem is for the volleyball team, it seems that there is only like one uniform. For gymnastics, we don't know for sure. And Nike, they have not commented on this. And I would say it's a little bit more nuanced than what people would tell on the internet, because for some sports they are several uniforms, but at the same time, for other sports, it would seem that there is still a problem of why are we even training in bikinis, even if like the girls don't want it. And why is there even like a bikini option when there is only one type of uniform in some of the sports where the men just have shorts? And Nike was like, hey, it's made to be the best, whatever aerodynamic way to just perform your sport as an athlete. And we did extensive research on that. Um, no, I'm just joking, but it was kind of what they said. And one of the athletes said very justly that whatever you are doing, putting a bikini option feels like we're still in the 70s and we're trying to attract audience to women's sports. So this is something that was built for the male gaze. We don't need it anymore, is what she said. And I think that is important because the USA gymnastics in the past few years have chosen like the long type of leotard. Why would they go back to a bikini if they feel better with that? We already had that discussion, so why is the bikini option still there? And also, like, for example, women's NBA has been has recorded the highest watch audience this year of all sports confounded, except like maybe the Super Bowl, more than the men's NBA. And so she was actually right in the sense that we don't need bikinis anymore. If nobody wants bikinis, or maybe one person wants bikini in the track field, do it for the track field and do shorts and leotards for other people. So I'm I'm just like kind of astonished that Nike didn't respond to that because it kind of felt like it necessitated a crisis response. But since they felt like they were in the right by doing research and it's not the only model for different sports, like maybe they felt that, when people see the other models, maybe they'll calm down. But actually, like, you know, I think it's just like nourishing the fire of people and just like people saying, hey, women, we want our bodies respected. We don't want our bits hanging out while we're performing like the highest feats of sports the world can watch. Like I don't know. It just feels I wanted to transition to that because I feel like it's important to talk about um body choices in the other fields, and it felt like a good parallel. But also, like, now that I'm saying this, it feels kind of ridiculous to even have a conversation. But I think it's necessary. So, how do you guys feel about that?
So I had a good example as you were talking, but like, I just the logic escapes me. Look, we've had this conversation so many times, like never in the history of people telling other people who or what they should do and how they should be has it ever worked. Can we get past this lesson now?
Yeah, I wanted to say, like, along the same thing, that people know what they feel comfortable with. So when we give them options that and tell them, like, this is the most aerodynamic, this is what's going to be the best for you in that sport, it really comes down to the energy that people feel when they wear it. Like, are they actually feeling comfortable when they wear it and they're performing the sport? Or are they doing it for a societal reason to feel more like viewers will be more attracted to this type of uniform and there'll be more, I don't know, more viewers, more hype about it.
Mm-hmm. And I don't
And
see why.
yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I felt the same when it came to our trans affirming research discussion as well, that like we've come so far in the mind, body, and spirit research. But although we're so focused on mind, body, because it's grounded on this earth, we haven't really leveled to that same field when it comes to the spirit. So when we ask children, like, are you comfortable, like, transitioning? Are you comfortable in this gender or are you comfortable in that gender? We haven't really fully understood that, like, people are speaking from their soul and they're addressing their true identity. And we haven't taken that into an importance that their soul is their true answer to that, you know? The spirit is just as important as the mind and body. And though that too, when it's, harmonized, can be a better expansion of medical research rather than just focusing on one side, like you guys were discussing quality versus quantity. And also harmony between the left and the right side of the brain, like the emotional side as well as the logical side, bringing more harmony with that. But yeah, just asking the energy within your soul, are you comfortable with that clothing? Is this for society or is this for you?
Yeah. Yeah, you're so right about that. And I don't understand why the automatic response to someone saying they don't feel comfortable in a certain body or a certain outfit would be, but this was made for you and we're in, like, it's kind of like we know better. You're saying you know better? You're saying you know better than an athlete that is going to perform before billions of people watching? Um, this kind of feels now that we see it in the women's sports area where we have more like leverage and there are more adults speaking that have the means and power to speak up about that. Um, it globally feels arrogant to make that choice for people.
It almost feels like an internal conflict, like when we doubt within ourselves, like, oh, is this the truth or is that the truth? Like, do we give in to the ego mindset or do we follow forward with that small little voice that gets louder and louder the more we listen to it?
Yeah, that's true. And I don't know why Nike could have like used it as such a good publicity. Like instead of responding with like, hey, we had extensive study about that, it feels like their pride was hurt and they responded from that place. And they could have made such a good influence by saying Nike is hearing you and responding to the women's call to have better suited equipments, and we will work on having more options. first of all, the conflict would have died down like so fast, and they could have had such a good reputation from that. And I feel, like when you want to, you can. It's like it's what I feel. It's like if you really wanted to, you would have done that, is my feeling. And that's just sad. Like their first response was kind of different. Hey, maybe like we still have like 3 months. Maybe they can still, go back on that and do something else, have another response. It's never too late, but yeah, it just feels like it's kind of sad to see that we still haven't learned our lessons in terms of like freedom of choices and body choices and body autonomy, and maybe, as Nadia would say, it's something about doubting yourself, maybe gaslighting yourself, like, oh, it's been done that way for so long. Maybe you don't feel like powerful enough to have that voice to change, to actually change things. So that's obviously like a huge lesson in compassion and inner healing and exploration, and also claiming your power, basically.
I think something that kind of just stands out to me is that we could be almost seeming to have this cyclical conversation about sport codes and what is allowable and what isn't. Remember when there was that whole massive thing about the swim caps, and then there was the massive thing about the full body swimming costume, and I think it speaks to almost a lack of being prepared to advance with people's desires, specifically from sporting bodies. It's literally what you were saying, that we've always done it this way, and so we'll continue. And by standard, that is probably quite dangerous, because we are going to perpetuate things that do require change. And it's important to ensure that the change is healthy enough to introduce greater levels of respect into sporting codes.
Yeah, respect, because we've come from a history of research where there used to be studies that advertised to women to smoke cigarettes because they would lose weight. And that was like a big deal for women. Yeah, because it's like, oh, it almost felt like it was a medicine to smoke cigarettes. This would be healthier for them. And so it's very, very important to discern the research and the purpose of the research um, when you're deciding for yourself. Because a lot of times research just decides for you what is the nutrition value, what is this, and it's really important to discern. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's time to add um to the metrics of research, like how people feel, just how people feel. It would feel good to just have that side to research. Yeah, I felt Sage did want to say something, but maybe I was wrong.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say too, yeah, like we can view this as, I feel like the truth of it is that as a society, we're learning how to, like you said, how to value and respect ourselves. Um, it became so normalized in some parts of the world for uh, for women and for, I guess, people in general, but for women to like wear really revealing clothing, and even sometimes it's still seen as like an empowering thing to do for women, but it's something that everyone needs to come to that conclusion about within themselves. Like, what is real empowerment? Um, Trying to enforce uniforms, like trying to push uniforms on women that are like very revealing, is very unethical. And it's like just being, yeah, it's being like no, because they're basically saying like no because like you're supposed to provide the value of this, like, you're supposed to provide this like sexual value to your audiences, which is like what they're saying. Of course, nobody says that, but that's the thought behind it. And we're pushing back against this more and more as a society, and that's a really healthy thing, and it's a good thing. And yeah, and it's nice too how I was thinking too of how like in some cultures and contexts and societies and stuff, modesty is much more enforced. And I think it's good that we have a plurality of all these cultures on the earth, because we can see different perspectives and see any value that we're missing or weak on in our society. Maybe in another society, they prize that value or vice versa. And so it's really good that we have those many perspectives.
Yeah.
Because in our society, like in American or largely Western society, that commercialization of sexual appeal and sexual energy is like out of control. And in other societies, it's just like not a thing as much. So, although maybe it is like, but kind of in an underground way, but who knows? You know what I mean? I just
Yeah.
thought that was good.
Yeah, I do. And again, I think it speaks to the fact that, we're saying like, hey, if Sha'Carri Richardson wants to wear a bikini or short shorts, she can wear whatever she wants. But the fact that you're presenting a mannequin of beach volleyball teams with large shorts for male and a really, really, really skimpy bikini for women was just like, who did this ad, please? Who was behind that communication? And I felt like maybe it was more for the audience than for the athletes. And I know that this is an economical event as well. It's been pretty clear from the organization in France. But like, if you're not doing this for the athletes, where this is literally the official USA uniform, um, I mean, who are you? Yeah, what is left of your values then, you know? Yeah, but I mean, I would love to, hear back from the people that are watching this. Like, we'll link the articles with it, so you can kind of see and discuss and make your own judgment on this, because it was pretty complex. Um, but I feel like overall we're just talking about things that are that just need to shift in society right now. And so maybe like the fact that we're talking about both these things this week feels like there's kind of an upheaval on or like the rise of like new choices that is needed. And sometimes, you know, it's reflected to you that you need to make a new choice in a very uncomfortable way. It's not very pretty. And so maybe that's what this conversation today is, so that we can do better in the future. And that doesn't mean that we need to um I guess have a condemnation um to death of people that of the NHS or Nike, but just like I think everyone is hoping maybe for more of a relationship. I would feel like the call that I'm feeling is that in Europe, trans people are like, hey, I would have liked more of a discussion with me before you publish that study or you publish that bill, what about me? Include me. And instead of having just like one athlete track field to model at the Paris Exposition of Nike's uniform, maybe they literally could have had a partnership with the athletes so that they could design with them. And I feel like for many teams around the world, there's been this discussion around the uniforms, and people were like, hey, I just wish that I'm the athlete here. I'm the one sacrificing my life to make this goal, make this career. I wish like I could have more of a say on how I'm going to sleep during the Olympics, like what I'm going to wear, what I'm going to do, And I think like there's a general call for more connection and more partnership overall in all of society. And I hope that this is what can come out of this discussion is that we need to heal like connection and relationships. So I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I would love to hear your views on this.
So I think you've unraveled the complexity. So for me, there is no complexity, there is no ambiguity. The fact is a partnership is required. The fact is that imposing something on anybody has never worked in any form. It's always led to disaster, it's led to struggle, it's led to fighting, it's led to all sorts of untoward things that are not required. There's no complexity there, there's no ambiguity there, it just does not work. And so, yes, definitely a call for greater connection, a greater dialogue. The thing about resolving a problem is that it actually does require two parties to bring their views to the table. So when you say you've done research with who? When? For what? Do they actually understand what they are telling you in this case? Because let's be honest, if you actually felt into your heart, and it's something that you spoke to Irene, if you felt into your heart, there's no way you're feeling comfortable when there's just a minuscule slip that puts you on the cover of a magazine because there was this part of your anatomy flashing. So, it just does not make sense. Like, actually, just respect people. Do not create havoc for yourself through sensationalism.
And again, in this time of like valuing authenticity and reputation on the internet, this could have been so good to say like we've actually made progress and we've made things, that's the thing, we've made things easy for ourselves. It would have made things so easy to say like instead of just doing all these heaps of research with more money, like bring the athletes in and just and they'll say like, oh, this design feels good. This does not feel good. I want this, I want that. Oh my God, we could save like so much time and money if people were just willing to explore that side of relationship. But I guess like um upsets are not rational. Like we're all learning to connect. And if there's one thing that we've learned from the past few years on this earth, is that we're learning how to connect in a better way. So hopefully lesson. Um, if not, well, I guess we'll just have more opportunities to just talk about that and make new choices. Yeah. All right. Any last words? No? All right, well then, we are almost at the end of this discussion. I want to thank everyone that watched us live and everyone that watched us on YouTube. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to, leave a comment, tell us about your feelings on these things and like and subscribe so we can do more of these discussions and, just also leave comments on what you would like us to talk about in the next few weeks. So thank you again, and I hope you have a good day or night wherever you are, and see you soon. Bye-bye.